Blesse mon cœur d'une langueur monotone. Je répète, blesse mon cœur d'une langueur monotone.
Hey everybody, Dutch Sense here. 12:52 a.m. Central Time on Thursday, May 21st, 2015. And I've got you looking at Earthquake 3D, which is a USGS feed of the most recent earthquakes. And you can see a new swarm has broken out down here in Southern California. And this has occurred directly at the Salton Sea volcanic buttes. And it's worthy to note that that also struck on the same day that we saw movement resume back up here in Idaho at the magma chamber for Yellowstone supervolcano. I put together a full blog post on the swarm down in Southern California about Salton Sea. I'll put a link down below to that so you can refresh up on Salton Sea if you're not familiar with the area. And the media talked about this volcano having a possible eruption which could send an ash plume cloud onto downtown San Diego if the Santa Anas are blowing right. And this comes on the heels of multiple volcanic earthquakes over the past 7 days. And you can again click through this post, which is linked down below the video, and you can follow it through to Mount Hood, Glacier Peak, Two Sisters, Mono Lake, Mammoth Mountain, Markagunt Volcanic Plateau, Bittner Butte, Salton Sea now, all showing movement over the last week, week and a half. That's a lot of dormant volcanic activity to see in light of the other news that was announced on May 1st, April 30th, right at the end of April, start of May, start of this month, that a new eruption is occurring along the west coast, off the coast of Oregon, at the axial seamount, right here where my mouse is. So just due east of there is the volcanic magma chamber for Yellowstone, which has showed movement over the past 24 hours, and if we take this down over the last week, you can really begin to see the activity that's occurred along the west coast. So I can just name off these areas again that showed movement all the way up here north in Washington State, Glacier Peak. It has new monitoring equipment that they're installing on Glacier Peak in case of a possible eruption. That's the professionals. They're installing new equipment there. Southeast of there, Yellowstone showing movement at the magma chamber. Due west of there, and that's Mount Hood, showed a 3.0 earthquake. Then due south of there, right here at the northwest border of Nevada and California, that's Bittner Butte volcano. Due south of there, we have the Inyo craters, which showed movement. South of there, Mammoth Mountain showed movement. South of there, Mono Lake showed movement. And then further south, along the Long Valley Caldera showed movement, terminating down here at Salton Sea with now a swarm of earthquakes developing there. Along the far coast, we saw a new pipeline rupture, which happened, oil pipeline, off the coast of Los Angeles, due west of the fracking operation that showed movement over the past several weeks. Well, just a few miles west now, the pipeline's ruptured and gone into the ocean and spilled over 10 miles worth of oil along the coastline there, guys. So is that related? I would say that the movement in Southern California that happened over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that they were denying was caused by fracking, has indeed caused surface movement. We saw this 3.8 here at the surface, 0.0 kilometer depth, and that's due north of the oil spill location. That was pretty much a natural earthquake. We can call these natural earthquakes along the coast. But the dormant volcanoes, those are all signs of greater tectonic pressure, and the fracking earthquakes that we saw last week were definitely man-made, and those were down here just in the north part of Los Angeles. Also, down here to the south, a very rare earthquake struck this past week at another dormant volcano, and to show that to you, this is not marked by the USGS. You won't find any volcano information on this location, at least on Google Earth or any other easily searchable source. We'll go ahead and put the coordinates in for the earthquake, and I'll show it to you. So this is the way you do it. You put the coordinates in from the USGS, hit search, it'll take you in on the earthquake epicenter, inspect the area, and you'll find what's around the area that stands out as rather odd. So here's our 4.0 earthquake, and we can first of all zoom in right here where the earthquake happened, and you can see the curved structure on this. This is actually part of an old volcanic field that you can make out the old cones here that make up the volcanic field. And just to the east, we have an unmarked, unnamed volcano, which may have a name somewhere, but it's at least Agua Nueva is the nearest town. USGS might have some information on that somewhere. but it's going to be hard to find. It's not easily marked like they would mark a known volcano. This is part of a larger volcanic field, and again, there's no doubt about it. You can come in and look at each one of these and inspect the area and see the old cinder cones that make up these large volcanic complexes down here in the south. This, again, large lava flow, again, undeniable. You can look that up yourself. Don't have time to get into that now. But what does that mean? It means that we saw movement happen here and to the north at the fracking operations in Fort Stockton, 3.1, 2.9 over the last 7 days. The area in between here, in between Fort Stockton and this dormant volcanic complex, a new fault line has opened up. And that was announced in 2012 and then again in 2013. The new fault line at the surface going south from Fort Stockton right towards that area. So that area moved and the area in Southern California moved. The area we were watching in between for the last 7 days did not move. We did not see activity down here in Baja California, which we would expect to normally see. So this lets us know the areas around here are moving at dormant volcanoes. Almost like an arrow pointing south, we need to watch the area just south of all this movement for a possible larger earthquake. And that would be more south near Mexico City now, since last week this whole area did not move in Gulf of California. Instead, the whole coast moved at dormant volcanoes. Another area we were watching last week for movement did not get hit with any large-scale activity, and that was off the coast of Vancouver Island, British Columbia, to the coast of Alaska, right in here. Did not move. We can expect that it should move at least now at a 5.0 level over the next 7 days. Let's hope it stays below 6. Before, we were watching for a greater than 6. Nothing struck there. Instead, it spilled down the coast at all the dormant volcanoes. That's somewhat good news to see for not a large earthquake there, but bad news to see prepping us up for other movement in the region. It's a trade-off. You either get one large earthquake up here to the north, or you get a spill-down effect which goes down the edge of the craton. As you can see here, the entire North American plate was displaced over the last 7 days on at least a 3.0 level. And that terminates right here at Texas, which experienced multiple earthquakes over the last 7 days throughout Texas at fracking operations. Really quick, don't have time to get into it here, but I do have to give a firm tongue lashing to the people who did this. Down in Texas, they have now outlawed local people, townships, from being able to stop fracking. They have banned fracking bans, not allowing people to vote locally whether or not they want to allow it. So, if you've got a frack well that's being built next to a playground, guess what? Now you can't do anything in Texas. That's highly unacceptable. I don't have time to get into it now, other than to say that move by politicians in Texas, and now to be taken by the people in Oklahoma as well, they're trying to stop local people throughout the state from being able to stop them. And they're making laws to stop you guys from being able to protest about it, from being able to get anything done. Sure, you can say something about it, but there's a law now that says if you live local, you can't do anything to change it. You can't pass any laws to stop them. So protest all you want. It doesn't matter, right? Well, that's what's happening in Texas and Oklahoma. They're denying that fracking causes earthquakes still, or at least were denying that fracking causes earthquakes down here in Texas. At least in Oklahoma, they admit that fracking causes earthquakes. It's a big step forward up here in Oklahoma. However, now they're trying to stop locals from being able to stop the fracking operation. And what's happened here is what I call a super fracture. When one area goes, it causes a large earthquake that then fractures other wells that then cause other large earthquakes, which then fracture other wells. And it's a domino effect. And it's a super fracture, quote unquote, that extends from the area which originally fractures, usually due to overdue stress on the edge of the craton, which the oil companies and gas companies are not responsible for. But what they are responsible for is not backing off after they see that first movement begin. Instead, what they're doing is they're denying that there's a problem and keep going headstrong into an area that should be backed off on for the time being. And we saw that happen in Arkansas when they were punching it in 2011. It led up to that 5.0 earthquake. The governor then held a moratorium on the fracking process and drew down well pressures. And guess what happened? Well, you don't see earthquakes very much here in Arkansas anymore, and it's not because they turned off the readings in the area, it's because they backed off. And that's what needs to happen in Texas and Oklahoma. You don't need to quit, you need to back off. And if you back off and draw down well pressures, you're going to see way less earthquakes. You'll still be able to produce. You won't see superfractures. And these earthquakes can then translate further east and distribute the weight, the pressure, evenly out along the edge of the craton like normal. And we'd see earthquakes pop more to the east and to the south along the edge of the New Madrid, going right up to the East Coast. Now, that may be a trade-off. Maybe the government's doing it. Maybe they intend for that to happen. Who knows? But it's happening there. You have your chance to back off. You didn't. It caused a super fracture. Now it's spreading like we'd expect. And you can expect going into the future for the next several years now in Texas, it's going to develop into an Oklahoma-type situation. Literally with hundreds, if not thousands, of 3.0 or greater earthquakes striking Texas over the next few years can be expected at most of the fracking operations extending upon the edge of the craton, which you can see here differentiated between yellow or tan and green. That's a height elevation, so you can see right along there. This area throughout Texas will start to do what we've seen in Oklahoma, which is dwarf the West Coast in earthquakes. Central Oklahoma going down into Texas, going up into Kansas, beating out the entire West Coast combined when it comes to earthquakes. And that's really saying something since all those dormant volcanoes are moving. So, in the U.S., where do we watch? Next 7 days, we have to watch south of San Diego, going south into Baja, mainly further south, Mexico City. Far to the north. And again, I have to say it again, we have to watch for the next 7 days. This is based upon other movement that I'm going to show you in the West Pacific, but over the next 7 days, we have to at least look out for some kind of compensation movement for the activity that's already occurred to the north. Since it didn't go over the last 7, it spread down the dormant volcanoes. That's another area we're going to have to watch, which nails it down to Yellowstone, Central California, also extending down to Salton Sea where we're seeing the swarm now. That's no shock. However, going forward over the next 7 days, the area south of here should move. The area to the north of here should move. Now, let's get into the West Pacific. Over the last 7 days, there's so many earthquakes on here for me to even show you. I have to actually take this up a notch to the larger earthquakes. Before we look at the larger earthquake, let's look at the depth of the earthquakes, which are indicated by the height off the map. The higher these are, the deeper they are. So, get an idea for where the deep earthquakes occurred. Now let's go look at where the large earthquakes occurred. Okay, so now we're looking at our, greater than 5.8 earthquakes in that range. Some of these were downgraded, but this is over the last 7 days. You can see the cluster of earthquakes that developed around the deep earthquakes. And just to the northwest of the area that had the deep earthquakes is the area that's seen the large shallow earthquakes. One lone rare earthquake down here to the south, 6.8, and that's right along the Antarctic Ridge, extending in the South Pacific Antarctic Ridge, and it's very rare to see movement down there. That only happens after we see excessive movement in the West Pacific. The whole Pacific plate is adjusting for this movement that happened over the last several weeks. We're going to look at the last 30 days in a few minutes, but right now this is just the last 7. So it's a tremendous amount of movement to see. Japan saw 6.8 in central Japan at the start of the week. We haven't seen anything develop further south since then. You can see a silent area right in the middle of all this mess here in the West Pacific. That's from the China coast, going east to Taiwan, north to Okinawa, south to Philippines. This small stretch, anytime we see all this other movement, usually compensates with either a swarm of large earthquakes or one single large earthquake. So, and when I say a swarm of large earthquakes, we saw 4 different 6.0s or greater pop off in Taiwan in one 24-hour period as compensation for movement that happened like this before. So we're going to have to watch again now. Again for North Philippines, Taiwan, going into South Japan for possible large-scale movement to compensate for this other activity. Also, the deep earthquakes here indicate that we're going to have to watch again for another large earthquake off the coast of Papua New Guinea, yet once again over the next 7 days, at least in that mid 6.0 level, possibly even upwards of greater than 7.0, again at this location. This is the location of now 5 different 7.0 earthquakes in the last 3 weeks. To show that all to you, let me just go ahead and turn on the USGS last 30 days of 4.5 and greater earthquakes. Again, another earthquake 3D feature that comes in really handy when you're trying to see all this other movement. You can download a copy of this for free, and I'll put a link down below to Earthquake 3D as well, so you guys can download copies. So, right now, look at all that activity over the last 30 days. And you say, okay, 4.0 and greater earthquakes, fours are somewhat small. Let's take this up to the 6.0s and greater. All right, so there we go. This is 6 and greater. Now, there's normally one 6.0 every 2 to 3 days. That's USGS averages. So let's say 2 6.0s a week. That means there should be 8 to 10 6.0s or greater, and what you actually see is more something like 18 to 20. Let's count it out. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 19. I may have miscounted there, but that just gives you a rough count of the earthquakes that have occurred here. And you can see the West Pacific dwarfing the East Pacific, which means the East Pacific should show some kind of large-scale movement over the next 7 days. And the areas to watch, again, are the areas where we would normally see movement but haven't seen movement. So this is the last 30. You can see the 6.2 that struck up here off the coast of Vancouver, British Columbia. That's the area to watch again to the north. To the south, nothing struck over the last 30 days on that 6.0 or greater level, which means we are tremendously overdue for activity south of California, north of Mexico City, somewhere in this region here, for at least a 6.0 or greater earthquake over the next 7 days. If nothing strikes there, then you can expect that we'll see volcanic eruptions kick off again somewhere in this region from South Mexico going down into Guatemala, somewhere in here. So either there's going to be a large earthquake or there will be multiple volcanic eruptions to compensate for this movement that's happened here over the last 30 days. And let's go look back over the last 7. And we'll refresh that. There we go, last 7 days of 6.0 and greater, and that's 4 events, which puts us 2 events above normal. And 2 of those events are 6.8s, which were borderline 7.0s. So you could say 2 7.0s in a week, 2 6.0s in a week. That's a lot of movement to see in the South Pacific. North Pacific, you're going to have to compensate for the South Pacific movement. We've nailed it down in the West Pacific. We've nailed it down in the East Pacific. Let's get into Central America and South America. You're not immune from this. Anytime we see activity to the south, activity to the east also follows. So, we saw the movement strike Peru. We saw the movement strike in Colombia. We were watching Peru and Colombia right in here. You can see it, multiple 5.0 earthquakes and a rare 4.5 struck in central Colombia. Also a large landslide struck in Colombia, which they blamed on rain after there wasn't much rain. So I would take that more a seismic movement that's being blamed on something else. But Peru moved, Colombia moved, and then a flurry of 4.0s, some going deep into the asthenosphere, which means we're going to have to watch South Chile for another volcanic eruption. So, again, that's not good news for South Chile. We just saw Calbuco blast off. It may be another eruption of Calbuco. Nailing it down to which volcano is going to be, I don't know. Each time we see these deep asthenosphere earthquakes in the Argentina-Chile border region, that's normally followed with some kind of volcanic activity and 5.0 earthquake activity to the northwest. Well, the 5.0 earthquake activity struck, no volcanic movement, meaning we need to watch for that. Again, because of this upwelling pressure from the West Pacific, the deep earthquakes have been found to press up from underneath and cause these shallow earthquakes up above. So the deep earthquakes down below here are causing these shallow earthquakes and eruptions up above. We saw multiple volcanoes pop off over the last 30 days, several unexpectedly, going north into Japan, Mount Hakone, going south into Indonesia, Mount Sinabung. Indonesia, we saw multiple volcanic eruptions. I can't even name them all in this video. It would take at least 5 minutes of naming volcanoes that erupted over the last 30 days. It's really phenomenal, people making note of that. So down here, again, we need to watch for another volcanic eruption in Chile. Going north into Central America, there has been a silent area, unfortunately, which we would expect to either see a volcanic eruption or some kind of earthquake compensation movement in between the two areas that have moved. And that lone 4.5 resting out here in Colombia lets you know that we're really looking at that Panama area right in here going into Colombia. We have a swarm to the north where they're also talking about an eruption of Fuego volcano, and that's rather rare. We haven't seen any eruptions at Fuego in a minute. Also, Turrialba in Costa Rica showing activity, which lets you know things are moving to the north, which means to the south. The compensation movement should occur because the activity to the north has been silent. Up here in Mexico, we're watching here. It's moved here with volcanoes as well, relieving some of that pressure, meaning the areas that haven't moved, which should compensate, will move larger and sooner over the next 7 days, most likely. In the United States, we need, again, to watch these two areas on the west coast. The Craton, this is, really hard for me to nail down at this point, but I'll try to as best I can. We're going to have to see movement to the east at some point here over the next 7 days. The magnitude level is the problem I'm having with this. I don't know whether to expect a large 5.9-ish type earthquake like we saw in 2011, which struck in Virginia, or are we going to see a series of 3 and 4.0s, a few swarms go up the east coast? Regardless of which it is, the watch zone is fairly small. It would extend from Virginia, from the mountains of Virginia, going north through New York into Quebec. So right along this ridge here, and that's making up the edge of the Craton. If you're a viewer of mine, you already know what I'm talking about here. Anytime we see large movement to the south or large movement to the west, that displaces the edge of the plate to the northeast. And either they've got all the seismographs turned off on the east coast, or we're going to see some kind of event here in the near term, because there hasn't been. So that nails it down. Again, the small strip of mountains going right up the edge of the Craton. That would be, as far south as the Appalachians, going north up into Quebec along the split that goes out to sea. You can even see it here. And again, that's the edge of the plate. Texas, now that you guys have made your silly decision to outlaw banning fracking, and since you're denying fracking causes earthquakes in the face of earthquakes striking beneath your fracking operations, you're probably going to be shocked when I say this, that you are due for more earthquakes. And you're going to see further development of at least mid-3 to 4.0 earthquakes develop across multiple operations, again, over the next several years. Nailing down the areas is fairly simple now. You just need to look at the area that had the 4.0 superfracture, which is just south of Dallas in Venus, Texas. Watch the areas adjacent to there, and that's where you're going to see your movement. The only difference between Oklahoma and North Texas is a line on a map. Okay, so you're going to see this carry on up into Oklahoma, further north into Kansas, and Kansas. Okay, well, we got to name you out too, because Kansas, you are now in the mix because of your neighbors to the south. Your neighbor to the south, Oklahoma, moving exponentially larger, and now you can add in the area moving further south all the way. Well, that's pushing right up your way, which means that you are going to see movement that comes down from the northwest, curls back up through the operations here, and then dead ends into you. Normally, we would see that movement translate further eastward to the New Madrid, and then further eastward up the east coast. Now, it's a trade-off. I don't know which is better. Large earthquakes on the New Madrid out in the farm fields of Missouri, or large earthquakes in urban areas of Oklahoma, Dallas, and Texas. I guess I, living in Missouri, would be much happier having you guys all get our big earthquakes down here. You guys might not like that, but you don't have a say anymore. So I guess that's, you let your representatives do all that for you. So I guess you chose those people, and you chose right, guys? You didn't choose wrong. So I guess you got what you chose. So I appreciate you guys taking the hit for us down here, so we don't have to take it here. Otherwise, the earthquakes would fully transfer and equalize, the pressure would equalize along the edge of the Craton, and you would see one large earthquake, a series of large earthquakes along the New Madrid and the East Coast, which would deform the area, cause rolling foothills, depressions, that kind of stuff that we saw in the past is not going to be happening for the near-term future, at least, because you guys are all taking it away from us down here where you drilled and made weak spots specifically for yourselves to make money off of. Well, as you're making money off of that, you're also going to incur an earthquake debt, and that's going to build up over time, and you're going to see well, it's going to build up into something that's going to become unmanageable at some point, guys. But I tried to tell you, you just weren't going to listen. Hawaii? Well, check it out. Let's just go over to Hawaii really quick and see what's going on. The lava lake began to drain last week. And everyone watching, the mainstream media issued reports saying there's the threat of an eruption at Kilauea again because the lava lake was draining. Well, guess what it's doing now? It's re-rising. It drained almost 300 feet, and now it's re-rising. Well, re-rising, what does that mean? Well, it looks like we're going to probably see a repeat event of what happened over the last month. So if the lava lake starts to re-rise, that means the pressure beneath the Pacific plate is re-rising. And it's causing these deep earthquakes, and the deep earthquakes are causing the shallow, larger earthquakes. Which means, now that we've seen a silencing off of actual eruptions, have you guys heard about any recent eruptions over the last 4 to 5 days? I haven't, and I keep track daily. So there haven't been any recent eruptions in the last few days, which means there's been a rapid silencing off. We were seeing them pop every few days, if not every day, for the last several weeks, and then it just stopped. Well, as that stopped, the pressure's rebuilding, obviously, with the deep earthquakes and with the re-rising of the lava chamber at the middle of the plate, lets you know that things are on the move again. So, those areas need to be on watch. Central America, you've been named out. South America, you've been named out. Asia, you've been named out. United States, you've been named out. What else is there to name? 2 other regions we have to watch. And this goes right down into the area just west of Kathmandu, Nepal. Of course, the large earthquake in Nepal, with the swarm still happening there. Professionals still calling for an additional 7.0 or greater earthquake to strike the region over the next few weeks. I certainly will not discount that out. That's an aftershock. We're going to expect it to move there. However, we're watching going forward into the future what to watch for large earthquake movement. So, just as we were expecting, the area to the west showed an excessive amount of movement. You can see it all here. Gulf of Aden going north into Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, this whole region here, even going into South Russia, showing a lot of movement to the west of the big movement that happened 3 weeks ago now in Nepal. This means the area to the west of here should show movement because we have 2 cluster spots that are showing up, which means the area in between should be in a state of flux. The area in between takes us down right into Turkey and to the Caspian Sea right here. So Caspian Sea to Turkey, right along the border region, right in between the 2 cluster spots, should show some kind of movement over the next 7 days above 6.0. Why? Because of a cluster of 5s here, a cluster of 4s here, means the area is in flux, should show a snap or a break of that pressure, and it should be one single large event, at least in the upper 5s or lower 6s. And again, that small area from the border region to the Caspian Sea. And it's not rocket science. You see the areas in between. That's the area that should move. And the area to the west, which has shown a cluster of earthquakes, you don't see it on the map here, but a 3.3 struck at the English Channel, 3.4 struck in Belgium, and we were watching. The forecast was issued specifically for English Channel, South England, going across Belgium into Netherlands, and said to need to watch for a 3 to 4.0 earthquake, and 2 mid 3.0s struck right here. So what does that mean? The area is primed and ready for more movement. Since we haven't seen any activity since then, the area to the south has moved, which means the area to the north should move again. So over the last 48 hours, what's the activity in Europe? Check it out. Not much going on there at all. To see any of the smaller earthquakes, we'd have to go look at the European service. So this is just showing us there's just one 3.9 that struck at the Romania border, just east of Italy, at the Greece-Romania border. That's the area that we're going to need to watch now for a 6.0 or greater earthquake. And again, the area near Turkey, we're expecting for a 6.0, and the area near Greece, watch for a 6.0 earthquake. Why? Pressure from the west, spilling across, showing 5.0s all the way, and then stopping right in this region. So this area is in flux. If one or the other goes, I won't be surprised. If we see Greece go and Turkey doesn't go, I won't be surprised. And if we see Turkey go and we don't see Greece go, then I won't be surprised. Further north in Europe, since you saw multiple 3.0 earthquakes up here to the north, this means the area to the west of you should move. So that puts us to the mid-Atlantic. Mid-Atlantic, you might want to watch out near the Azores, which are the island chains right here, volcanic, going south to Canaries. So mid-Atlantic, Azores, south to Canaries. It's a pretty large stretch, actually, so let's nail this down a little bit better. Let's watch the Canaries specifically and the Azores specifically going to the mid-Atlantic ridge. Drop out this middle area in between. Two small little pockets across the whole of the ocean. And that takes us back over, and that finishes the earthquake forecast. I hope I'm wrong on some of this stuff. I hope we don't see any large earthquakes. I hope things die out and that I'm 100% wrong on all points. Unfortunately, in the past, several of the areas that we were watching were hit on the money when we were watching. That means have an earthquake plan ready. Be prepared, just in case. It's better to know what's going on and not see something happen than it is to not know something's going on and have something happen. And all I can say, you need to have 5 main points covered: food, water, transportation, communications, and possibly self-defense if you live in an area that requires that. Those things need to be covered on any earthquake plan, severe weather plan, or disaster plan in general. Now is the time to develop it. When you have the funds, you have the time, do it. It's my personal recommendation. It might sit there and never get used, but at least you'll have it. It'll be a comfort feeling. It really will, knowing that you got that. When the power goes out, you're like, oh man, that's right, power goes out. Oh, no problem. And you go right to it. While everybody else is sitting there in the dark, you actually have some light. That big of a difference. Sometimes it's the small things that matter that can really save someone's life. You might want to think about having, if you have gas in your house, a way to turn off the gas set by the area where the gas comes into your house. So you don't have to rummage around and try and figure out how to turn that off when your house is shaking or when you smell gas after an earthquake. If you live in California, this is old news. If you live on the West Coast, if you live anywhere around the Ring of Fire, you're like, yeah, I've heard it all before. Well, I'm going to tell you again. Have an earthquake plan ready. Be prepared just in case. We're at a time of unrest, especially now when things have been going for about 3 weeks. People are starting to get tired of hearing about earthquakes. This is the time where you really need to watch. We're, again, in that 2011 type scenario. There's no doubt about it. If you've watched my videos over the last several years, you know what you're seeing on the screen right here. Okay? Get a look at it. And especially now, look at the U.S., guys. This is the new addition over the last 2 years that we're seeing happen here. In the past, when all this was going on, we saw very little of this here. This here is troubling for me since I live in the States. Guys, again, I'm not exaggerating when I'm telling you that when you see a bunch of dormant volcanoes moving on the West Coast all at once, when you see them announcing that they're putting new monitoring equipment on Glacier Peak, when you see them announcing that the magma chamber for Yellowstone is far bigger than they could have ever imagined, and when you see earthquakes striking there, when you see pipelines rupturing, when you see earthquakes at Texas, at dormant volcanoes, those are all signs of coming events. One last thing I want to bring your attention to. On the screen here, if you're curious and you've made it this far in this video, you should follow this dang link down below. This is the one you want to go see. Tattooed, my buddy online, found something today he made a video on showing happening on the entire West Coast. And it's a series of steam plumes that are so vast and so large, indicating something's going on in the West Coast that's phenomenal. Now, what does it mean? I don't know. Is it the sign of an earthquake that's beyond measure? I don't know. Is it the sign of a coming eruption? I don't know. I don't even know. I've watched for years. This is the first time that anybody's ever seen something this big happening on the West Coast, multiple days in a row. We'll have to watch it and keep an eye out. That's why I'm so concerned at this point. With this amount of earthquakes that are happening, and the plume activity, and the other activity happening around the planet, it's just a bad combination. I wish I could give you guys some good news. I wish I could just give you an earthquake report where, hey, looks like things are finally calming down, guys. Looks like things are dying out. That will come eventually, just like it did in 2011 and 2012. But right now, we're at that height point, the serious point where people are not being warned when they should be warned. Okay? And the media is not going to tell you. So it's going to take somebody online, a friend, a loved one, someone who pays attention to these things to let you guys know that there's a greater building problem coming. So south of California and far Pacific Northwest, you guys are under the gun. And Mexico, I hope I'm wrong. Much love, guys. Be safe.